And if I could just sort of sum up your work, I think that you translated the immersive soundstage that I had in mind perfectly to Atmos in a way that the stereo mix suggested, but now it's fully realized. The other thing that I wanted to add, it's that I'm an engineer because I have extreme trust issues. And I felt entirely through this process from the very beginning that I could trust you. So kudos to you for doing such wonderful work. Greetings, Ian here, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So today, my colleague in Immersive Audio, Jonathan Cornell, is back. And I know usually when you folks click on our videos, we're here to review some new release, typically something involving Dolby Atmos or surround or quadraphonic. Today, we're actually going to talk about a project that we've collaborated on. We're putting our money where our mouth is, so to speak. The name of this record is Morri's Rock Boutique, and it's by the band Refestramus. You may have noticed that for the last 2 months or so, I've been wearing the same shirt. This has all been kind of leading up to this release rollout. So I first got involved with this band in 2021, and that's when Derek Ferguson sent me demos of these songs that he had laying around for like 25 years. And I mixed the first album, and a lot of our collaborators were musicians we picked up off of Fiverr. So it'd be just like a random guitarist, a random keyboardist. We pretty much stuck to the same singers, but there were multiple singers on the first album. By the time of the second record, I had made some, I would say, good-natured complaints about the first record, and I really see the first record as being a collection of really well-produced demos. So for the second record, we tried to keep to a consistent cast of players, namely Derek Pavlik, who played guitar, Jerry King on bass, Derek returning on drums, of course, and writing the songs, and Rogelio, our keyboardist from Italy, covered all of the keyboard work on that second record. For the third record, I brought in these two players that I knew, Diane Potter Voetlin and Jan Christiana. I took lessons from Diane on piano, and I guess we decided we liked working together enough that I invited her to join the band. This record is kind of a hybridized approach to where we started. We started as like a pandemic project where everybody was recording in their home studios and sending stuff in. This one, Derek and I actually worked on the drum parts together, and we recorded most of the backing tracks at Aardvark Productions in Steubenville, Ohio, with Dan Bozick handling the engineering duties. And I think Dan's engineering is a huge part of why the drums sound the way they do on this record, because one of the big leaps from 1 to 2 to 3 was implementation of real live acoustic drums. Other than that, a couple of interesting guests on this. Probably most notably, David Jackson from Graaf Generator is here. Rick Witkowski from the band Crack the Sky. And we have the violinist, the current violinist, Joe Denizen from Kansas, playing electric violin on the track Cossack's Dream. And I promise, Jonathan, I will let you speak. But
no, keep going. This is good.
Okay. Good. So when I was working on this record, Morri's Rock Boutique, I would come home from the studio in the evenings and often find myself engaging with surround mixes. Two of the big influences on especially the drum sound of this record, Marillion, specifically the album Misplaced Childhood, as well as Bill Bruford's sound on Close to the Edge. So naturally, I was listening to those surround mixes in the evenings and Jethro Tull's Broadsword and the Beast outtakes. And so I think that there was this kind of undercurrent forming, this influence starting to come in sort of a Trojan horse sort of way, of thinking about, at the recording level, thinking about how this music would translate to surround sound. And it went so far as there were moments of the record where I used like really extreme panning because I was thinking about how it might sit in an Atmos mix. And so fast forward to when Jan Christiana added a lot of his arrangements, we were definitely talking a lot of cinema, specifically the song T5 or Tonight, 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 Tonight. I was giving directions like, this is like a David Lynch film, or that sort of thing. So, and I think there's even a reference to Danny Elfman at the end there, in the outro. So the point being that I think that this music inherently had a cinematic quality. And when it came time to do the mix, specifically on songs like T5, there was definitely too much for two speakers to handle. So through this YouTube channel, I was introduced to Jonathan and his work for immersiveaudioalbum.com. And I was listening, this is fast forward like a year later, I was listening to your Chris Holt mixes, and more recently your mixes for the band Elder and their new record. And when I went to Chicago this past year to hang out with Refestramus, and I saw them perform live, I kind of was working on Derek Ferguson, the composer. I was like, you really need to think about multi-channel music. I know this guy who can do it. I know it's not going to break the bank for you. And, you really need to work with this guy. And I think I finally, me and Jan kind of broke him down. And we started this process of me sending you the multi-track files, and you would send me mixes to listen to. I would kind of comment and send them back. And, eventually we developed a mix of the whole record. And to be honest with you, I'm really proud of it. So, I guess I'll turn this over to you, Jonathan. You can talk about your experience putting this together. What challenged you? What did you enjoy the most? I'll kind of open the floor to you.
I think, you were just finishing the stereo mix of the record at the time that I was doing the Atmos of Across the Milky Way.
Yeah.
So it was sort of like a serendipitous connection. And then I remember you had sent me the stems for the song T5 first. And I had that for like a couple weeks to just kind of look through and see what it was all about. And I remember, to your point about there are parts on the record where like you could tell like you were sort of thinking about surround already. There's a moment in that song where the sax like suddenly slides for the left speaker to the right. Yeah. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh, this is going to be cool. Yeah. But, I think the reason why the record sounds good in Atmos and in 5.1 is because for the same reason that a lot of progressive music does.
Yeah.
Which is that it's the core of it is like regular rock instrumentation, but then there's all these extra layers. There's a lot of different keyboard sounds on the album, depending on the track. It's either like there's piano and organ. I assume these are like keyboard patches. They didn't actually use like a B3 on the.
I know there's a CP80 that's on.
Okay.
Diane is a really great like pro keyboardist. So I'm not sure exactly what she used, but I think it might be a mixture of real instruments with some patches. I know Jan had a lot to do with her sonic palette. So that's a question I think when you interview them, I think that would be a really good question.
Well, regardless of whether it's, patches or the real deal, there are a lot of different like keyboard and synthesizer textures. And there are a lot of moments on the record where there's like one sound that's made up of like 5 parts. So like a good example of this is the main riff in the song Storms. The down, 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 down. Like that's it's 2 distorted guitars, 1 clean guitar, and then like a mini Moog kind of synth sound layered into
Geddy
it.
Lee sound.
Yeah. Or like the thing Geddy used, I think it was called an Oberheim, the keyboard that
I believe it is an Oberheim.
He would use on the old Rush records, but it was one of those like sort of high pitched, like sort of Moog kind of sounds. And when you listen to all that, the stereo mix, like, the high part of the Moog sort of fills in what's missing from the guitar. And it becomes like this kind of one thing. But then when you get into surround, you could start like sort of deconstructing the parts. Yeah. And I think that's kind of what you and I like about these surround mixes, where it gives you insight into the way that they recorded things.
Right. Yeah.
So at the same time, though, because it's like heavier music, and this is probably the heaviest project that I've worked on. I mean,
even
compared
more so than Elder.
Well, I started this before Elder, so yeah, I would say Elder is probably heavier, but this started before then. And with heavier music, it's tricky to find a good balance in surround, because you don't want to talking specifically about like the core instruments, you know, drums, bass, and the doubled rhythm guitars, like the distorted guitars, you generally want to keep those parts kind of in the same vicinity. Like you can't be mixing this stuff and put all the guitars in the back and the drums in the front. It doesn't work. I tried it. I even tried putting the guitars all the way in the sides in Atmos, and that didn't work either. But at the same time, if you put all that stuff in the front, the mix becomes very front heavy. And it's kind of like you're listening in stereo, and then these sort of random overdubs come out of different places, and it becomes distracting.
Right.
I think a good example of that is, I mean, there's not a ton of classic metal mixed in surround or Atmos, but about 20 years ago, there was a surround mix of Metallica's Black Album that came out on DVD, and it's very much like that kind of thing. It's almost like you're listening to the stereo mix in the front, and then like every once in a while, like there's a harmony vocal that shoots out of the back, or like a guitar overdub or something. And the way it's done, at least for me, like, you know, apologies to anyone who likes that 5-for-1 mix, but I found it incredibly distracting. Mm-hmm. Like it was sort of like you were just listening to someone like soloing parts of the multi-track. Like it didn't gel the way that the original mix did. Yeah. So I wanted to avoid that problem mixing this material. And there's a lot more on this record than there is on that one. So it wasn't so much of a problem. But I found the best way that it worked is if with the doubled guitars, generally you have the drums kind of mainly in the front, but you gave me all the drum tracks. So I was able to put some of the toms in the back, which sounds cool when he does like a big fill. And the guitars are like in both the front and the side. So they're like a little bit forward. And I found that sort of gave it the enveloping quality I wanted without it becoming too disjointed.
Yeah.
And then with all the other stuff, you know, you could go crazy with it. On some of the songs, like there's, you know, like you said, there's like a CP80 piano and there's an organ. So you could have the piano on the side and the organ at the back. A lot of the synth stuff I put in the heights. A lot of the backing vocals I put in the heights. For some of the songs, there were enough backing vocals that you could have different layers at the top and the bottom. So it was really, you know, it's the kind of record that you want to mix in surround, because it's not like you're straining yourself to come up with creative ways to spread the instruments apart. Like there were a lot of different ways I could have gone about it. There were a couple ideas I got from you that I wouldn't have thought of that changed my perspective on it. But yeah, and I guess the only other like overall thing I would say about it is that the instrumentation would really vary from song to song, which kept it interesting. Like it starts off with that track Storms, which I had told you kind of reminded me of like classic Kansas, like that kind of vibe. And then, you know, Cossack's Dream is like a completely different kind of thing. Then you get to a track like Heller NYC with all the saxophones, and that's a totally different kind of vibe. So it wasn't like I would just kind of set the template for the instruments and it stayed that way for the whole mix. There's a lot of changes in the way things are placed, generally because it's different kinds of instruments on every song. Yeah. So yeah, I mean it was hard work. And that's not to say that you were like a difficult taskmaster or anything. You had a lot of good ideas, and we didn't go through that many iterations of it. I'd say maybe we did like 3 versions. Like the third version was the one that ended up being the final one. But I'm excited for people to, you know, discover the kind of work I've been doing through it and to discover the band's music, because it's a really good record. And I always tell people that the best thing about doing a surround mix is that you've suddenly, you know, opened up your music to a whole new audience of people. Because as we know, there's a lot of people out there, probably, you know, fans who watch this channel who will just buy anything that comes out in surrounds.
Yeah. Hopefully.
I hope so. Yeah. I hope we're doing a good job of selling it.
Yeah, I hope so. So before we get, you know, into like a track by track dissection, and we've already kind of talked about Storms a little bit. But I thought we could take a moment and kind of give people an idea of maybe, you know, you mentioned Kansas, like what this music is, because when you say progressive rock can be anything from, you know, like Can to Opeth. And it's like, what do those two bands have in common? Well, they have guitar, bass, and drums, and that's about it. You know, so I think it would be a good idea to kind of talk about what kind of prog this is, because, and I think you're kind of like leaning into that already when talking about how every song is a little bit different because, and I think that this is a part of our identity that goes back to that first album where we used almost a different band on every song. And, by the next album, we were trying to use the same band on every song. And I think that that's something we still tried to do here, while also bringing in all of these eclectic influences. Because one thing that's really big for Ferguson and I is that neither one of us are really huge on the seriousness of prog. We like a little bit of absurd humor. And I think that a lot of our more elaborate arrangement ideas sort of come from the idea of, well, let's keep this in a certain sense of levity and enjoyment. So yeah, I think Kansas is a solid reference point just because they were an eclectic prog band and also a very American prog band identity. Like Ferguson likes to use the word heartland prog because he's going for this like very radio friendly, but also kind of deceptively, well, again, I keep using the word eclectic, but I think that that's sort of the thing that ties it all together. But I would also point to bands like Graaf Generator as a huge influence on what we do, because Graaf could have a really serious song, but you got the sense that Graaf's seriousness almost reached a point of absurdity at times. And I've read their book, and they talk about how some of the more extreme moments of Pawn Hearts, they were just laughing their butts off in the studio when they made it. So there was a little bit of that. I think Jethro Tull is another big influence. I mean, that kind of runs through everything we do. Genesis, all eras of Genesis, even the pop eras. We're just as likely to pull from Abacab as we are The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. And another excellent point, I think, is the band Procol Harum. And that's another band that I, especially talking with Diane, because they have the organ and keyboard duo thing. So essentially, the message that I want to get across to our viewers is that this has a lot of the eccentricities of prog, but it's still decidedly meant to be accessible and approachable and based in song form. So we talked about Storms a little bit. The one thing that I would mention is that when we were developing Storms, this is one that I purposefully tried to rein in a lot of the arrangements on, and I tried to keep it as sparse as possible. And the idea is I wanted to draw people slowly into our world because I knew it was going to be the opening track. Moving on to Cossack's Dream, I think already we start to get a lot more elaborate. I love the way that your mix starts with Diane's keyboard solo starting in the back and then moving forward, and then you hear like the orchestra samples underneath.
Well, I stole that idea from Steven Wilson's The Overview. There's a part in the middle of the Objects Outlive Us track where it's like after there's a huge like instrumental freak out. Like I forget what the individual parts of it are called. Like each section has a different name. But there's this section where after there's like a big sort of like really crazy instrumental break, there are these acoustic guitars that start at the back and slowly move to the front as they fade in. So I figured like kind of the same thing happens in the song, like this like piano riff sort of slowly fades in. So why not have it, start in the back and walk to the front? And then you get the strings that sort of come up from behind and above, and that takes you into the rest of the song.
Yeah, and I think that it's also, arrangement and dynamically, it's a song that starts off really soft because I believe the direction, and I don't want to give too much away, but I believe the direction I gave to Diane was to think locomotive breath, the way that starts with an acoustic piano solo, and in that case from John Evan, and then opens up in like this pounding dynamic that kind of hits you in the face. And I feel like that's a moment especially that lends itself to surround, because we can almost go from like, I don't want to say monaural, but like a stereo to breaking out in Atmos. It's kind of like the moment in The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy opens the door and it turns to Technicolor.
Well, that's one of the cool things about surround or about Atmos. You can have the sound stage, like the size of it, change based on the dynamics Because generally, you know, in a track, when things get louder, it's just that there's more instruments being added, right?
Right. Yeah.
So it's kind of like you get this cool effect where when you have all the speakers, you have the mix sort of get bigger and then get smaller. That's something I always find effective in a good surround mix.
Yeah. Yeah. And it definitely, you know, it translates artistically, I think, what I had in mind kind of when we developed that opening in that song. And as I mentioned before, this is the song with Joe Denizen's electric violin solo. And I'm just going to add a little tidbit to this conversation that maybe you don't know. But he actually sent us, I think, 5 different takes of that. And a lot of his takes were very technical and virtuosic. And, you know, that's wonderful. I think there's definitely a space for that. But the direction that Ferguson and I kind of discussed was, you know, we like virtuosity, but the virtuosity has to serve the songs. So I ended up doing like a comp of those 5 different takes of the most melodic bits. And the melodic bits are still super virtuosic. So, you know, I think it's a dazzling solo. But listening to it, it's kind of hard for even me to tell anymore where the edits are because I feel like it flows so well. And I think it was Jan's idea to have that kind of bounce around in the heights a little bit, which I think is very effective.
Well, part of my style with Atmos is I do like to use the heights a lot.
Sure.
And not just to like, we talk about there's some mixes where the heights are used kind of to just like elevate things. Like a lot of the Frank Zappa mixes are like that, where the drums are kind of like here. Yeah. I think that can be cool with some stuff, but generally I like when there's a distinct separation between the stuff that's in the heights and the bottom. There are a couple of moments on the record, generally like with the solos, like I'll have some elevation, but not totally. Like a lot of the guitar solos are kind of like halfway up the front wall.
Yeah.
On some of the earlier passes, I tried putting some of the solos only in the heights, and it sounded like a little weird.
Sure.
But otherwise, like the backing vocals, a lot of the synth parts are very much only in the heights. One of the cool things I remember from the Cossack Stream track is that it was one of the ones where there were like different sets of backing vocals.
Yeah, I was going to mention that.
Yeah, so initially on the first set of stems you sent me, most tracks had like a stereo bounce of all the backing vocals.
Like a sum.
And we had decided on a couple of songs, we went back to Jan and we were like, we want the separate elements, because there were a couple parts where the vocals are doing like sort of a round thing, like at the end of Storms. And it seemed like a missed opportunity to have it all coming from the same place, you know, when you have 11 speakers. So on a couple of the songs, we went back and we used all the individual vocals and all the individual vocal reverbs, which was like a lot of tracks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then on some of the other ones, like on Cossack Stream, there were already 2 different stereo bounces of the vocals that are sort of like interacting with each other throughout the track.
And it's Jan and Diane kind of bouncing off one another. And I learned long after the record was done that they did a lot of that stuff live, if you can believe it.
Yeah, so, you know, in the Atmos mix, you know, you could put one of those in the front heights and one of them in the back heights. Yes. And then you have the lead vocal on the ground, and you have this sort of, you know, these things coming out of different places.
Yeah, the effect is like Jan is over my head or above me, and Diane is popping up over the couch. Like, you know, like he's hiding and da-da, and it brings a smile to my face every time.
I mean, I was going for the effect like in some of the Gentle Giant mixes, where there's like the vocals hitting off each other from all the different corners. So, you know, that's something that always works in a surround mix when you spread out the backing vocals, at least for me.
Agreed. Now, in talking about multiple vocals, we've already sort of touched upon T5, but I think it's worthy of a section of its own, just because it was a challenge for me to mix. And I think that's why I sent that one to you first, is like, well, this is the one I struggled with the most. Let's see what you do with this. Like right from the get-go, like this is one of those songs where I didn't hold back on the arrangements much. I kind of included everything that Jan gave me. And it opens sort of in the way that the New York City song opens. It opens with like this scene, the setting of the scene where you know, you hear some synths bubbling around you, and the sax is kind of up front but in the distance, and it just kind of draws you into the cinematic world. But I think that the main thing to mention about this is that it features a singer who's unique to this song. She's a special guest, and her name's Lynx. She's from a stoner metal band that Ferguson absolutely adores called Old Blood. And she was absolutely lovely to work with. I mostly dealt with her over email, but she was pretty much game for anything, and she understood exactly the vibe we were going for. Like, I mentioned that I was going for a David Lynch Lost Highway thing, and she was like, oh, well, I have tickets to see Blue Velvet at the cemetery where he's buried at this weekend, so I know exactly what you're looking for. And so she absolutely nailed that. And this song, I think, is unique in that we have a male voice and a woman's voice, but if you don't know, you might confuse them because Jan's got a very high voice. It's almost like a falsetto at times. And she's got a very low, bluesy. If you don't know who Coco Taylor was, that's almost who she reminds me of a little bit. But it's kind of got this like magical or mystic quality to her voice that's very special. And I think that you did a really excellent job of differentiating the two, to where Jan is occupying a particular space and she's occupying her own space. Now, there's this moment that I absolutely love, and I'll take credit for the idea. But I think it's another one of those moments that I already had in my head, like when we were developing the track. And that's this section. I guess I should mention T5 is an epic. Like, there's a bunch of little vignettes.
It's one of two like long songs in the album. But
right.
You know, they're like those two tracks, they're what, like 7 minutes each, something like that.
Yeah, our long songs are like all under 9 minutes. Yeah.
In general, like for prog, it's a pretty concise record. Like all the songs are like pretty easily digestible, even the longer ones. That's one of the things I appreciate about the record. But go on.
We have this moment in the track that's like a call and response situation where Jan is singing this refrain of all over again, and Lynx is interjecting with this like different phrases and stuff. And I love the fact that, and I'll take credit for this idea, that you know, I kind of had this situation in my mind when we recorded it, that if it were translated to surround sound, she would be hitting the four corners of the room with each one of those little interjections. And I remember the first pass you sent to me, she was a little buried in that section. And I said, why don't you try moving her around? And suddenly she became very much unburied. Like her voice became like the most prominent part of that section for me.
Well, to your point about the fact that it's a duet, it's like in surround, you know, you can start to get creative with that kind of thing. I mean, I did try an initial version where like she was in the front and Jan was in the back, and it sounded weird at the parts where he was singing by himself. Like that didn't quite gel. But at the same time, I feel like it would be boring to just both have them in the front, like in the stereo mix. So I think what I ended up doing is her voice was always at ground level and his was like more in the front heights. Yeah. So they were kind of both in the front, but one was a little bit above the other. So you get some kind of, especially in the parts where they're singing in unison, you could tell the voices are coming from different places.
Right.
And that generally worked pretty well. And one thing about the vocals across the whole record is that the vocal was a stereo stem, usually with the reverb in it. So I didn't do like the vocals only in the center channel. They're kind of across all three in the front. You know, maybe like
very Bruce.
maybe like 60 front, 40 center, like something like that. And I think that worked pretty well. I know some people like the vocals only in the center, or some people don't. Personally, like I find when you're sitting in the sweet spot, when it's done well, like you can't really tell.
Right.
But I don't know, whenever I try to do the vocals only in the center, it never sounds as good as when other people do it. So I decided to be a little more conservative with that. But I think it sounds good.
But I like that Bruce Sword style, like front wall vocal effect. And I think it works really well across this album. But well, okay, there's other things to talk about. So obviously there's multiple guitar parts. There's Derek Pavlik's guitar parts, which were recorded almost live. Like we did those at Aardvark in Steubenville. Jan has like 3 or 4 different guitar parts, including a baritone guitar part. And one of the things that I'm sort of amazed by, as you know, I thought I knew this record better than anybody, and I probably do. But I was hearing details in the performances that I'd never noticed before, because, you know, we have guitars positioned up front, and then it's sort of like the vocal call and response thing. You'll have guitars in the back kind of like answering to them. And suddenly I'm noticing like these little patterns and performance things happening. And then also another thing to mention is the saxophone, because I remember the first mix I had of this, I said, well, you know, the saxophone is the lead. And it's like, how many metal songs do you know where the saxophone is the lead instrument?
Well, there are a couple different sax parts. There's the one that's kind of like the solo.
Yeah.
And then there are those other like little sort of, they come at the end of like a phrase or something, these little interjections, like that one that slides left to right. So a lot of those like ones that sort of pop up are obviously coming out of the back, because that's what you would expect.
Right.
But with that lead sax, it's kind of like the same thing, like, you know, in the front, but with some elevation to help it kind of stand out a little bit more. But to your point about the guitars, I noticed this on a couple of other songs on the album too. I think Cossack Dream was another one where there are, instead of like your standard just stereo rhythm guitar, instead there were 4 guitars. And it was kind of like they were all playing the same thing, but one of them has like a different tone than the other. Yeah. So you could get this effect where, you know, in surround, you could put one stereo stem in the front, one in the back. And you get this effect, like, even though they're playing the same part, because the tones are different, it's sort of like you're surrounded by the distorted guitars. And I thought that worked really well, both on Cossack Dream and in this song.
Yeah. Well, I think that you really uncovered the complexity of this track without losing the glue. Do you want to talk a little bit about it? Because we describe this idea of glue, which is a very non-technical term, but do you want to talk a little bit about how you were able to strike that balance between separation, but also retaining kind of the power of the stereo mix?
Well, it's kind of like what I was saying at the beginning of the video about the whole thing where you have to sort of keep the guitars in the same vicinity as the drums, or it starts to sound like disconnected. Yeah. But I think, like, you know, where you draw the line at where something sounds disjointed or it works kind of is different from person to person. Yeah. I mean, there are some, like, I've talked to people, like, I'm a big fan of the Atmos mix that Steven Wilson did of Van Morrison's Moon Dance. Sure. Which is very spread out, you know, with the horns above you and guitars next to you. And I've played it for a couple other people, and some other people have been like, I don't know, this sounds weird. Like, I feel like the instruments should be closer together. So it's kind of like a taste thing. Like, at the end of the day, when you're me and you're sitting in the studio with the 11 speakers, I just kind of do what sounds good to me. Sure. Yeah. In general. But I think really the whole glue thing, the main point is that especially with rock, you just have to, you can't absolutely separate all the instruments. Yeah. You have to sort of, when there's things panned out, it generally doesn't work when there's, like, you know, a guitar part that's only in one speaker. Yeah. Like, it helps when you kind of, like, you know, instead of having it 100% back, like 70% back. So there's a little bit of the signal left in the front, so it just sounds more connected. There's a lot of, you know, instances of that throughout the record. Even with some of the backing vocals, like, they're very elevated, but not all the way. You know, it's like 80% elevation. So if you narrow the separation just a little bit, it still sounds very discreet, if you will. Like, it still sounds like those parts are in a different place, but it's a little more held together. Yeah. And so I was just, go ahead. Yeah. Sorry. I was saying I was just trying to stay conscious of that, you know, throughout the album. But with some of the denser tracks, like with T5, like, there's so many instruments in play that it's hard to keep track of everything anyway. Right? Sure. Yeah. And I feel like your Atmos mix still honors the intent of my stereo mix, but there are sort of a few important differences that are subtle, but they make a huge difference, I guess, in Atmos. And I was wondering how much you did refer back to my stereo mix, and how much did you say, well, you know, this sounds good to me, so I'm going to try it. Well, I'll tell you exactly what I did. So the first thing I would do is you gave me the stereo masters for the record. Right. So I make a Pro Tools session. I would import the stereo mix at the top of the session. Then I would import all the stems and just sort of shift them on the timeline until when you would switch between them, they were more or less lined up. Can never get it quite exactly, but close. And then I would make a VCA fader for all the stems. If you know what that is in Pro Tools, it's kind of like basically like a group controller.
Okay.
Like you can make a group, and then you can either mute and solo all the tracks in the group or turn them up and down. And what I would literally do is while I was mixing, I would just toggle like on my keyboard. I'd solo the stereo mix, then solo the group with all the stems, then solo the stereo mix, and you would sort of switch between them. And in a lot of cases, like you had told me at the beginning of the project, like I should just do what I want to do.
Yeah.
Like you had told me, like, don't be afraid to kind of like, if you want to bring some part out or if you want to kind of subtly change the sound of it. So I think if you A/B them, the drums and bass are a little bit louder in the Atmos mix in general than they are in the stereo, which isn't to say like they were too low in the stereo. I don't know, it's just kind of a taste thing.
Yeah.
There are a couple parts in the record where there are things that it's like there was some part in the background that I thought was interesting.
Sure.
Going back to Storms, a good example is during the keyboard solo. There's like a solo guitar playing like the main riff under the keyboard. Mm-hmm. And it's really quiet in the stereo. And I was like, I don't know, this is kind of cool. Like I'll just make that louder. And I don't remember every instance of that throughout the album, but there are certain places where I was like, this part's cool. Like let's see that a little bit. And then also with some of the parts that are unlayered, like on the tracks where we went back to the original backing vocal layers, like I just kind of balanced them by ear. So they don't quite, when they're spread out, they don't quite hit the same way as when it's all summed into a stereo track. So it does sound a little bit different than the stereo mix, but it's not like we used any alternate takes or anything, or any of the songs like run longer. Like it's time aligned exactly to the stereo. It's just balanced a little bit differently.
Yeah, and it's two very different approaches, because when you're mixing a stereo mix, as a band is a democracy. And you're taking mixing notes from everyone, and you're trying to satisfy everyone. And I'm speaking as myself, also try to satisfy me as the mixer. And I think your approach is very different, because you're really only listening to me, my points of view, as well as your reference, which is the stereo mix. And I have always felt that when you hire somebody to do a job like this, you hire them to do what they do. So I may guide you, but to some extent, I also want to be hands off, because I want to see what you're hearing, what your approach to the material is. And I think the result is, like I said, I'm hearing a lot of stuff in the record I've never noticed before, a lot of nuance, especially in, the performance angle, between Jan and Diane. So moving on to, I think you said this is your favorite song on the record, Hell or New York City.
You skipped Lakeview Samurai.
Oh, I skipped Lakeview Samurai. Well, cut that. So after tonight, whatever, how many? T5.
T5,
Yeah, T5. T times 5. We have a song called Lakeview Samurai, which is an example of folklore in the album, because Derek lives in Lakeview, Chicago. And apparently there is a real kind of folk hero who's a modern day samurai. Like he carries the sword, but he's got AirPods in and he's jamming to his music, and he just kind of exists in this world. And, of course we got to write a song about him, because this is a total anachronism. It's a cultural anachronism to have this man in, Illinois. So this is, I would say, one of the least conventional songs on the record, just in terms of instrumentation, because it was very important to us to bring in authentic Japanese instruments. At its core, though, it's like a hard rock song. And maybe you'll agree or not, but this almost has like an REM feel to it for me. So do you want to talk about maybe the challenge of balancing like these traditional folk instruments with this heavy rock band sound?
Yeah, well, I mean, the fun thing about Atmos is you could do like the rock band on the bottom and all the weird stuff on the top. Right. That's kind of what the approach to it was. I mean, there's that like whatever you call that Japanese instrument with like that sort of plucky string sound.
That might be a koto?
Yeah. So that is pretty much always in the heights. I think at the beginning of the track, I had it sort of pan from the rear heights to the front. I thought that was kind of a cool moment. This was another example where there are a lot of multi-track vocals. Like in the chorus, there's 3 channels of vocals. So you could do, one in the front, one in the back, one at the top. Otherwise with the traditional rock band stuff, it was kind of the same as the other songs, like drums kind of all around. There was this channel, I think it was labeled on the stems as like big toms or something that was, you could tell.
Drum. Okay, no,
big drum,
but go ahead.
That was an overdub that was not connected to the rest of the drum kit, and you could place that separately.
Yeah.
This was one of the harder tracks to mix, I think,
Sure.
particularly during the chorus. Like there's just kind of a lot to sort out.
Yeah.
And it's a question of like, what do you want to hear?
Yeah.
And with Atmos, I imagine in stereo it was more difficult because in Atmos you could just kind of naturally hear everything better anyway. And that was kind of the thing I was going for in the record. Like I just wanted you to be able to hear everything.
Yeah.
But I don't remember too many like specific details about. Of course, there's the when you yell, "Watch out for the katana," in after the solo, and of course that had to go on the top. There were like the Queen-esque guitars, like you were going for that kind of Brian May like guitar harmony thing. And I remember originally that was all baked into one stereo stem, so I had just kind of placed that. And then you were like, let's go back to the original 3 guitars and have them placed, some of them in front of you, some of them behind you, and that worked really well.
Yeah.
But definitely one of the stranger songs on the record, I would say. not bad strange, but just strange nonetheless.
And as a quick sidebar, I find that sitting down and listening to the Atmos mix is maybe the first time I've been able to appreciate and see this album as a album. Whereas prior, when I listened to it, I always saw it as individual songs or vignettes. But something about hearing this all put together in this way, it makes it flow better for me. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because I'm too close to it. Maybe it's because I've heard the work in progress mixes far more than I ever heard the final master. But sitting down and hearing it all put together, I'm kind of amazed at, despite the fact that we're pulling in all these different strange directions, how well it flows. And I'm guessing the presentation has something to do with that. But a quick comment about the Brian May section. So that was something that Derek Pavlik and I developed. And we recorded it here in this room, which is my studio. And we had, at that point, I think had done maybe about 5 years worth of work together as sort of like this engineer and session musician duo, like taking jobs and recording rhythm guitar and solos and stuff for people and arranging for people. And we were getting a little bit bored with taking guitar solos all the time and having to come up with new tones and new ideas. And we had this discussion. It was like, well, what if we just, instead of taking a solo, we turned this into a guitar orchestra? And, Brian May, of course, is the obvious influence here because he was doing that 40 years ago. So that's why that came to mind, is because I remember painstakingly doing every single one of those parts. I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting if we had like a dual going in the front and then the back kind of creeps up over top of you, because he even does like a run, like a da-ga-da-ga-da-ga-da-da, kind of thing. And it just called for me. Now, the big drum, that is it's a drum. It's like an enormous bass drum. And that lived in Rick Witkowski's Studio L in Weirton. And Derek Ferguson spent the weekend at Studio L, and we were pulling stuff out to take to Aardvark, which is just about 15 minutes away in Steubenville. And we saw that giant drum, and it's like, we're using that for something. So I think that the big drum, really what it does is it just communicates the motif, the main motif of the song, which is bum 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 bum. It's kind of like an accent on that.
I remember after the first pass, you were like, turn that drum up.
Yeah,
more big drum
for a reason.
Turn that up. Yeah.
But that's a wonderful mix. And moving on to track 5, which I believe is your favorite track on the
Yes.
album, Heller, New York City. This is all about Ferguson's experience in the wonderful NYC. And I would say, and maybe you can comment on this, I would say this is probably the most elaborate song in terms of instrumentation.
Yeah, I mean, there's like it's like a sax orchestra.
Yes.
You know, there's like on the stems, I would say there were probably 10 channels of sax.
Yeah.
Something like that. Like it was an unusual amount. And I remember I kept trying like different combinations just, you know, in the Atmos mix to see what to do with that. Like there were enough of them that you could put a different sax in all the speakers. You know, in all 11 speakers that make up a 714 setup. So I think I tried that, and it was like too watered down, like how all the parts separated. So what I ended up doing in the end was I made 2 stereo buses. I made one that had like all like the higher parts and one that had all the lower ones. And I just put one in the front heights and one in the rear heights. So the overall effect was kind of like band on the ground, saxes on the top. Yeah. And I think that worked pretty well. There's a song on one of the XTC records. I think it's on the Big Express. There's this song called The Everyday Story of Small Town, where there's like basically like the band, like the bands on the bottom and like the brass on the top in the Atmos mix. So that's kind of where I got the idea from.
Oh, that's cool.
But from a recording standpoint, I think it's one of the best sounding tracks on the album.
It is, yeah.
I'm not sure like why that is, but in general, I just felt that way.
I would guess that, this is the transition point where Jan and Diane were doing more stuff. And I think in this case, we brought, and it was also like maybe the third weekend, like Lakeview Samurai was, I think, the first weekend. And maybe Storms and Cossacks was the second weekend. And then by the third weekend, we were doing Heller, New York City, and Deathless. And at this point, instead of working from a Ferguson demo, we had taken the Ferguson demo, sent it off to Jan and Diane. They had added all of their arrangements, and then we were actually tracking to their arrangements so that we could actually interact with their vocals and stuff. So that's probably why. Deathless is the same. Like they had already kind of finished their parts before we took it to the studio and worked on it.
Well, I think also on Heller NYC, like at least at the beginning, the drum pattern is like he's just hitting the snare. Like there's no cymbals or anything. And generally when there's a lot of like sort of cymbals, like it starts to get kind of splashy, and it's harder to maintain like quote unquote good sonics. Yeah. So I think that was part of it as well. Another thing I remember from that song was there's that, I don't know what instrument it was. Maybe it was like a clarinet or something. That thing that oscillates left to right.
Yeah. Yep. Whatever you're talking about.
Whatever that is. And I remember, again, like I tried a few different combinations. There was one where it was just only in the side speakers, which sounded cool. But I think in the final version, we ended up kind of moving it around a bit. Like it kind of moves from the front to the back. So the whole stereo thing is shifting front to back as it's oscillating left to right. So you kind of get the effect that thing is swirling around you, which I thought worked really well.
Yeah, it's awesome. And we should mention that this is David Jackson's big feature. Graaf Generator saxophonist, famous for playing 2 or 3 saxes at once. He's very Roland Kirk inspired, if you know who Roland Kirk was. When I mixed this, David actually sent me a breakdown of here's how Graaf Generator's mixes worked. And I followed his directions as closely as possible in the stereo mix. And one thing that I never thought of, it just occurred to me now, is that we do have great surround mixes for Graaf Generator. And I was wondering if you referred back to those at any point during this process, or did you just listen to the stereo mix?
When mixing the song, I have them. Like I have the ones that came out in. I've heard them, but I wasn't specifically like referring to them while I was mixing this album. I'm just like trying to think of other details in the song. There's that backing vocal line before like the quiet section with like the me, you know, like it's sort of like echoes out, and that was perfect to move around. Sure. There's a similar thing where you were talking about where Lynx's voice jumps from corner to corner in T5. There's another moment like that in this track, like where do you go? You know, where it
Yeah, yeah,
jumps
yeah.
from corner to corner.
Jan's talking to himself in the
Yeah,
Polish
because
accent.
in the stereo mix it went left to right, so it was
Yeah.
just kind of like an expansion of that. Instead of going
Sure.
left right left, it goes front back back.
Yeah, that's the implication when I have these harsh, severe pans, is that
Yeah.
like this should bounce around the room. But one thing that we haven't talked about that's the signature of this track is Mitch Lawrence's clarinet playing. The whole like nucleus of this idea was, and I got to watch my language for YouTube content, but there was this TikTok video where somebody arrives in New York and they're filming themselves and says, "Look, I'm in New York. I finally made it." And there's this like dude off camera somewhere who goes, "Shut the F up." And so we recreated that in the studio with Mitch playing that quote from Gershwin, where he does that big clarinet run from what is that? Rhapsody in Blue? Yeah, he does that. Rhapsody
Yeah, I think
in Blue
so.
quote. And so we have this very cinematic moment where Jan's talking to himself like, "Hey, did you hear about that band that wants to nuke New York? Get out of here!" And while this is happening, in the front, you've got Ferguson yelling at Mitch to stop playing, Rhapsody in Blue, the most New York thing ever. So yeah, that was the unique kind of idea that I brought to this song, was that I thought outside of Supertramp, I couldn't think of a single, not even progressive rock, but just rock song or pop song in general that featured the clarinet. I was like, well, okay, I want to be the first. And I think at one point you told me that you've never mixed anything with clarinet in it before.
Nope. And I think I probably won't for a while.
Yeah. But yeah, I just thought that was interesting that we were bringing unique stuff to you, and there's some clavier parts. There's lots of vocals to play with. Yeah, this is one of my favorites too, but I have to say that Deathless has always been the centerpiece of the record for me. And when it came to mixing this one, this is one, again, where Jan and Diane had provided all their parts up front. They were playing to our demo. And so we basically just had to take it to the studio and record the drums. And I remember my, we'll use Mike's term and say mixology here, was that I just watched a documentary on Avalon, Roxy Music's Avalon, where Bob Clearmountain said that when it came time to mix this record, I didn't try to interfere. I just kind of mixed what was there. And I took that same philosophy to mixing Deathless. I think as such, to me, for my money, this is sonically the best song on the record. And maybe that's just, me being humble because I had nothing to do with it, but it really does sound great to me. And there's so many guitar parts and keyboard parts that just serve to highlight little moments. But some of the stuff I'm proudest of is the drum work. Because sort of like, T5, I remember talking with Ferguson in the studio and I was like, well, when is it? Is it tomorrow? No, it's tonight. The feel has to be this rising feel. When it came time to do Deathless, the feel was trying to capture the sections in one unbroken take so that it just flowed. So every section we punched in, but we weren't punching in a bar here or there. We were trying to make it coherent. And one of the best moments of the record for me was the final movement, we'll say, of Deathless. Because Deathless is one of these songs that explicitly says on the back of the record is multiple movements. And we got to the section which I believe we're calling And He Always Will, which is this 3/4 Knights in White satiny type coda to the song. And that was the day when one of the important players couldn't show up to the studio. Mitch was there with his saxophone. I think he had just done Heller, New York City earlier in the day. And it's like, okay, what are we going to do? So the studio had a vocal booth. And we ended up setting up Mitch in the vocal booth. And we recorded the drums and the sax solo live together. And that, to me, is one of the best moments of the record. So when it came time to mix it in Atmos, one of the things that I told you was, have fun with the drums, because there's one section where it's supposed to be like an atom bomb explosion, and we have two sets of drums going at the same time. And I love what you did with the toms, because I feel like I'm being inundated by toms in that section where he's going. Do you want to talk about, what was in your head at that point? Was there any reference point for that section for you?
Well, it was one of those moments where I was glad the toms were on a separate channel, because it would have been harder to do that if we were just working with the stereo tracks. I would have had to probably pan the whole drum thing to the back to get that kind of effect.
Yeah.
But I don't know, basically just like pretty much any Steven Wilson mix where there's enough drum channels to do that, usually he'll kind of spread the toms out. I mean, the mix I've said where I think it's done best is Rush's A Farewell to Kings. So, I mean, that's always a reference point. And I think it's one of those things that always works. And I like to do it when the elements are available. I mean, with some projects, they just give you a, stereo bounce of the drums. Or, talking about vintage albums, sometimes the drums were recorded directly to, one or two channels, and you can't do that. Like Who's Next is a good example of that. But the toms in the back is something that always works, I think. Yes. And that's probably the moment of the album where it's most effective. I would agree with you.
Yeah. Yep. And some of those pad effects are kind of rising to the ceiling for me. I really dig that section a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I would move the synth parts and the heights around a lot. Like I found it was kind of boring, like to just have like a stereo synth sitting in the heights, especially if it's like a pad kind of part. So you could have it slowly kind of like circle while the rest of the band is underneath, and that always worked really well. I like that
pitch bend anyway. It's like
yeah. I was gonna say I like the whole section with Jan singing the like Goodbye America part. I think is great. Yeah.
Yep.
And, I mean, it's basically like three songs in one. Like it
is. Yes. I would say that it's more of a suite than T5 is, because T5 is more like a song that has sections. This is sections that make up a song, and or songs that make up a longer song or something like that. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Goodbye America section, because when he says, America, the things you do, I find are coming back to you. And then the backing vocals go back to you, back to you, back to you. That's one of my favorite parts of the album, especially in Atmos. Like
that was another thing, like the synth thing in Heller NYC, where the stereo panning was baked into the stem, but I just had it move forward and back at the same time. So the net effect is like the back to you, it hits off the four corners of the top.
Yeah, it's your Ian Anderson Toad in the Hole. I'm coming through the back door moment.
Yeah,
like it called to you, and you heard it. So the other moment of this song, again, this song is so full of many of my favorite moments of the record. But Diane's Moog solo is like pure ecstasy to me, and I think should we tell people what my note was? It said, everything you wanted the Animals Atmos mix to be, do it here.
Yep.
And it works really well.
To be fair, that is the best part of the Animals Atmos mix. I think that section in Dogs, that's just like the Rick Wright section. That's probably my favorite part of the whole record in Atmos.
Agreed. Yeah. And it also follows up with Jan's guitar solo, which I think is absolutely lovely. I love the moments in the song, because I remember when we were recording this part where it goes dum dum ba dum ba dum bum ba. I love that whole section where it sounds like the drums and the keyboards are chasing each other around, and I think you translated that just perfectly well. So we move on to the final song on the album. I don't think we're going to talk about the bonuses too much, other than to say that they're available. But the Lucky Ones, which is kind of this I don't want to say punk rock, but it's a punky take on Pachelbel's Canon. It's got the same chord sequence as the Pachelbel's Canon, but I would say that this is maybe the quirkiest song on the album, and we can talk with Ferguson about it next week. But this is basically a love song for SRIs, like Xanax or
Okay.
mood enhancement drugs. And the story I always tell is that when I think of great drug songs and like mood enhancement songs, I immediately go back to the Beatles. And this was a perfect song for Rick Witkowski to play on, because you go to Rick's Studio L and his studio walls are plastered with the Fab Four. Like, I don't need to tell him or show him what the Getting Better guitar part sounds like. You know, I just said, can you do Getting Better here? And so we did that. And if you listen very closely, maybe you picked up on this. Underneath that section, Jan is playing the bridge from Dr. Robert, which is another Beatles drug song. So it just, and this wasn't planned. Like, he just kind of innately knew to do that. I didn't tell him to do that. But one thing that was really fun with this is that we had vocoder to play
Yes, that's what I was going to mention.
Yeah, you want to talk about the vocoder part a little bit?
Well, of course, there's like in the intro and outro, that's like the thing where it goes, "You are lucky." Well, you know, you can have that sort of bounce around the room. So that was kind of an easy, like, made for Atmos moment. Yeah, I thought this was kind of like the most kind of the poppiest song on the album, I guess you could say. By design,
yes.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I don't really think of it as the end of the record, because I don't think you told me until later on that the last two tracks were like bonus tracks. So I just kind of mixed the whole thing, like thinking that was the intended album sequence. But yeah, on this one as well, a lot of like the sort of vocal interactions between Jan and Diane, where you could do the, you know, one vocal above, one below. And yeah, I would kind of like the standard mixology kind of applies from the other songs, except that there were more like synthetic elements in the song. Like in the intro and outro, there was also like a drum machine or some kind of like digital percussion.
Yep.
I remember a good note from you at the very end is to have the guitar circle on the outro.
Yeah, that was just Rick playing around. Like, he was just kind of ad-libbing that, improvising that, and it became, I think, the bedrock of that entire outro. And on the first pass of it, it was getting a little bit lost, and it was sort of like my direction to you with the Lynx all over again vocal. You know, move that around so it stands out a little bit more. And I definitely feel like that is now the glue that holds that outro together.
There's a great quote from Alan Parsons from like an old interview where he was talking about like his ideas about mixing and surround. And he said like his main directive is you always want to keep the listener interested. Yeah. So like if you want something to stand out, just like move it around. Right, and that there's a good example of that working in that section.
The only other thing I wanted to add was when you said this is the most poppy song, other than the Beatles, the directive that I gave Jan and Diane for the arrangements was, and Rick, was this needs to be a happy song, but it's an artificially happy song. You know,
I think it's got that vibe. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's got a little bit of like, we're happy, but it's because we're chemically tweaked. You know, so and like my favorite moment of this is the people like you hate people like us, we're the lucky ones. And we actually did a real Christmas song, which has been thankfully deleted.
Okay.
But I find that this part where it opens up with the "We're the lucky ones, and I know that it's people like you," and Jan's playing the Dr. Robert thing. I think that that's more Christmassy than our actual Christmas song. I mean, there's something about the sleigh bells and things going around, and I love the way that you open that up to the widescreen in the Atmos mix, because it's very much what I had intended with the stereo mix. And if I could just sort of sum up your work, you know, sufficiently, it's that I think that you translated the soundstage that I had in mind, the immersive soundstage that I had in mind, perfectly to Atmos, in a way that the stereo mix suggested, but now it's fully realized. And the other thing that I wanted to add, just to anybody who's thinking about maybe hiring you for work, and it's that I'm an engineer because I have extreme trust issues. And I felt entirely through this process from the very beginning that I could trust you. So kudos to you for doing such wonderful work on this.
And it was very helpful that you actually had a surround system you could listen to it on. A lot of these projects are based on people approving like binaural renders.
Sure.
So, usually it's always better when you can listen on speakers.
Agreed.
Which is to say that, I don't know if you've listened to it, but the binaural for this, like, it turned out okay. Like, certainly some of the more extreme parts of the record, like where there's things popping out at different corners, you get the sense that it is sort of beyond where the headphones end, which I think is kind of the best you could do with binaural. But to talk a little bit about, I mean, I guess we could touch on the bonus tracks, but talking about what specifically, I would say what's in the MKV file when you buy it from IAA, is that we also made a instrumental Atmos mix.
Right. So I need to listen to that yet.
So I did another pass where I muted all the vocals and all the vocal reverbs, and that in itself kind of reveals even more to the complexity of the album, particularly on songs like, Heller NYC or T5, where you can really hear all the instrumentation. So it's got Atmos, it's got 5.1, which we derived from the Atmos, but it was very carefully done and tweaked. And I know Ferguson approved it based on the 5.1.
That's right. Yeah. In fact, Ferguson's reaction was, because he had heard a lot of like probably mid-tier 5.1 mixes, and I won't name names.
There's a lot of them, though.
There's a lot of them. Yeah, sure. Let's be honest. And his reaction to this was, I feel like I've been ripped off by other 5.1 mixes I've heard. This is how a surround mix should sound. Like, I thought that was a winning endorsement for you. Like, you converted him.
Absolutely. And of course, the MKV also has the original stereo mix that Ian did, which I just turned it down to match the volume of the other mixes. Yeah. But the stereo master, as you hear it on all the other platforms, is on there as well. Yeah. So we've kind of made, like I was telling you when we were messaging about it, like it's basically like a virtual SD Blu-ray.
Correct. Yeah.
And it has the visualizer, where I basically did a screen capture of the Dolby Atmos renderer. So it's not explicitly labeled as to which objects correspond to which instruments, but you can get a sense of like some of the movement and placement that's happening in the mix visually, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you want to comment on the extras? Because my thinking with the extras was they don't exist on streaming. They're not on the vinyl. The only way you can get the extras is the CD version. And I think the discussion that you and I had was, we want to give somebody who's going to buy the immersive edition something extra. Both of these songs, Wasteland Part 1 and Another Country, are remakes of demos that were created for the first album, Decoupage. And the idea here was to kind of recreate them in our current style and fix maybe some issues that I had with the original versions. And I think that they're mostly successful in that. Although I do think that they are outliers from the rest of the material, because you can kind of tell that they aren't as developed musically or arrangement wise as the others.
I would say I felt arrangement wise they were a little more straightforward than some of the other songs. Like there were less like sort of eccentric little surprises in them. Like it was kind of just like drums, bass, guitar, and a couple of keyboards or some backing vocals or something. But as far as the mixes go, I mean, I tried my best to make them fit with the rest of the album in terms of the way things are placed, and so which is typically to say, kind of like guitars in front, keyboard in back, harmony vocals sometimes in the top, sometimes in the back. But I think the songs are catchy. Another Country is my favorite of the two.
Mine as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it was worthwhile to mix them in Atmos and include them. I mean, it brings the overall, runtime of the album is like, it's like 50 minutes, something like that.
Yeah, like 47, 48 minutes. Like if we really wanted to, we could have stuck those on the vinyl, like done one at the end of side A and the other at the end of side B or whatever. But I just always felt that these were part of a different era of the band. And as you said, they're not as elaborate as the main album songs, but I'm happy to include them. And as I said, it gives people yet another thing to entice them, all these different mixes, plus you get to hear the extras. This is out today because I'm going to be releasing the video at midnight on Friday morning, which is the release date. Do you want to tell folks where they can purchase this and how?
Well, it's going to be available for now exclusively as a download at immersiveaudioalbum.com. and we'll have the link in the description and the short kind of like blog I wrote about it, which basically is kind of like a more concise version of this conversation we've been having about how the mix of each song was approached. We're going to be doing an interview with the band, probably focusing less on the Atmosness and more on like the development of the material, songwriting and recording process, and that'll be on my YouTube channel. And I guess the last question I wanted to pose is, do you think there could be another Refestramus Atmos mix?
Well, a couple of things come to mind. So Ferguson is impressed by the work, and I haven't really spoken with him too much about it, but I think the most interesting thing going forward, because we do intend to record another record with these two, I think the most interesting thing going forward is everybody in the band now is going to have this idea of Atmos thinking, surround sound music thinking. And I'm kind of interested to see where we go direction-wise now that this is an option for us. There's also the previous album, Interest, that I still have all the multi-tracks for. In order to bring that to multi-channel, it would require a little bit of legwork for me. Simply because a lot of those plugins are now defunct, and I'm a perfectionist. And one of the things that we did going into this record is I basically sent you stems that already had my effects baked into them. And I would want to do that with Interest, but I think I would want to make some improvements overall, just to make it consistent on a level with this album. So, you know, maybe Interest at some point, but I definitely think our music going forward, we're going to be thinking in multi-channel. So I'm actually more excited for what the new music might sound like, especially having this experience in our minds. We're also going to play Prog Day in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, which is a music festival that I work at. And there are plans to record and film that show. So hopefully the weather's good, you know, hopefully it's a good performance. But and I haven't discussed this with the guys, so maybe it'll be completely shot down, but I would love it if we had our own Chris Holt live situation where there's a live film, there's an immersive mix, and it's a nice little package that you can get on IAA. So thinking ahead, and then also, you know, there's the coloratura stuff, which we can talk about another time, but Derek Ferguson is involved with that project as well. So I am thinking about that.
Yeah, and I think for the Morri's Rock Boutique Atmos, that will probably end up on streaming services at some point. I mean, I provided you and the band with the ADMs to submit to any distributor. So I think if we're going to kind of keep it on IA like for a little bit in the beginning, just to see how many we can sell, and then from there, it'll probably appear elsewhere. I think you had floated like the exploring the idea of doing a Blu-ray, but I mean, you'll have to see what happens with that.
That's so far just been a private discussion between you and I. And when I see the band in September, I'm going to probably have dinner with them and catch up, and we'll talk. We'll spend some quality time together. So yeah, we'll just have to see where it goes.
To people watching, I would say, like, if you want more, the best thing you could do is buy it to support both the band and IA. And I think for what you get in the package, it's a good deal. And of course, because it's a download, there's no shipping and there's no wait time. Like, you just get to listen to it on the day it came out. I think you can't beat that.
In my opinion, this is like $50 or $60 worth of material for $25. And it's a heck of a deal. It's a steal of a deal. So yeah, with that in mind, folks who have hopefully enjoyed this entire lengthy conversation, I want to thank you. Because I know supporting independent music is not always the easiest thing to do. But I would like your response in the comments. If you go and buy this today and download it, let me know in the comments below what you think. If not, maybe just let us know what you think of this video, and if this has enticed you maybe to check it out on streaming, or even just to listen to my stereo mix on streaming. Also, let us know below if you'd like to hear more Refestramus music in surround sound coming forward, or even more of my other projects. I'd mentioned coloratura is a possibility. I'll leave a link to that in the description, so you can go check out some coloratura. In the meantime, consider subscribing to both of our channels if you haven't. Again, I am collaborating with Jonathan's IAA YouTube channel on this video, so if you go to the subscribe bar Make sure you're subscribed to my channel as well as IAA, because as Jonathan mentioned, next week or thereabouts, he and I are going to collaborate on another video in which we're going to interview the Refestramus all together. So yeah, make sure you're subscribed to both channels, like the video, leave a comment with your impressions, and until then, we got another video to record. So take care, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and you'll see and hear from us really, really soon. All right, take care, Jonathan. Thank you again, and wonderful work on this. Really appreciate your thorough attention to detail.
Thanks, Ian.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.